So let's talk about waterfowl hunting on public lands. First of all, before I get started, I want to recognize some folks in the audience. We do have some wetland managers here today that may be called upon to further the conversation or provide answers to some questions. And that would be Jason Black from McPherson Wetlands, Monty and Travis from Neosho, Jacob Coulter from Meridazine, and again, Dustin Mingarelli is here as a regional supervisor out of the Topeka office. So, and I'm also pleased to see some avid waterfowl hunters in the group, in the audience today too, because this is a start, this is a recommendation we're proposing, but I want to ensure that this is vetted, discussed with plenty of input from commissioners and the public before, before we get to the point of submitting this in the promulgation process through Dan and Terry. So I appreciate everybody's input as we move forward with this. Without rehashing a bunch of history, many of you know what the issues have been the last few years since the pandemic saw an increase in non-resident pressure on our waterfowl areas specifically. And at the time, the question was, is this a moment in time or is this the new norm? We believe now this is probably the new norm. Within the last year of evaluation, we believe that it's still not necessarily an overcrowding issue. It's an overpressure issue on these public wetlands. And the culture of the non-residents has changed in the fact that these non-residents are coming in larger groups. They're spending a lot more days consecutively in the marsh all day long, group bagging, things like that. We've discussed this before. So this isn't anything new that I'm bringing up here. And again, we continue to hear from our resident hunters that this is an issue and their satisfaction has been decreasing too. So we take that into serious consideration as well. Staff have continued to meet throughout the last few years from the Public Lands Division, Wildlife Division, and Law Enforcement Division. And there's been a lot of recommendations, proposals, conversations as to what would work best. And we've vetted a lot of those. I feel we're in a good place today with a sound recommendation, but we continue to talk about a lot of other things, equipment restrictions, refuges in time, things like that. We'll continue to discuss as we move forward with this. So having said that, we initially thought that a proposal would work best under our public lands reference document under 115.8-1 subsection E, which is a fairly lengthy reference document as it is. After vetting further within the ranks of public lands and the wildlife and law enforcement divisions, specifically the two enforcement divisions, we felt it best to come up and propose a separate Kansas administrative regulation under the 8 series for public lands. We believe it'd be more clearly defined, more easily to enforce. And if we did, for some unknown reason, have to come back and request amendments, it would be cleaner and easier to do that in a standalone KAR. One thing I will say before I get into the beef of our proposal is through this vetting process, we really feel like this is the most palatable. It's the most easy to understand. It's not something that's going to require us coming back to the commission on an annual basis to ask for amendments. Whereas if we were to propose specific dates, times, weeks, things like that, we would. So without further ado, I'd like to get into the beef of what we're presenting. So what staff is proposing is a new Kansas administrative regulation, like I said, under the 115.8 series, to help alleviate the issues that have been addressed. And that new KR would be 115.826. Titled non-resident access. And so how that would read would be non-resident waterfowl hunting on KDWP Department lands and waters shall be restricted to Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays throughout the duration of the established Kansas waterfowl seasons, including September teal season. So basically, non-residents would not be allowed to hunt waterfowl on department lands and waters Wednesday through Sunday. So that gives residents every opening Saturday. Plus it gives them, the Wednesday through Saturday, but it also, allows non-residents. And we did hear from some residents and non-residents that they would like to see family traditions kept alive, where if a sibling or a child moved away and their family tradition was to come hunt that opening weekend with family members, that Sunday still allows that opportunity with that resident hunter on into the first of the week. So, you know, and this would include WEHA and IWEHA properties as well, as we adopt many of our public lands regulations on WEHA and IWEHA. In order for this to work, we really feel strongly that you know, this is going to have to be implemented on federal waters as well. We don't want to shift the pressure from one property to another. And so we had meetings with the Bureau of Reclamation and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers staff, and they do support this initiative. The Bureau of Reclamation, which would include the North Central and Northwest reservoirs of Glen Elder, Norton, Sebelius, Cedar Bluff, Sebelius, Norton, Cedar Bluff, all those, they're fully supportive of what we're recommending here. So we could implement this restriction on those Bureau of Federal Waters. The Corps of Engineers is supportive. There's just some details that we'll continue the conversation with them as it pertains to how our leases are written on the water portion. For with the Corps of Engineer properties, there is a lot on these reservoir properties, a portion that they manage themselves and not department staff. So we need to figure out it and still talk about how that might look moving forward with this type of restriction. For resident status, active military, non-resident lifetime license holders, you know, college students would still be classified as residents like we allow for several other hunting privileges, just to keep it easy. And we do believe that this proposal has the least potential for a negative economic impact, because we're not saying you can't come to Kansas to hunt as a non-resident. You can still come. You're just restricted to these properties on Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays. You know, you can still go hunt on private duck clubs and things like that if you so choose. They can still stay in hotels and motels. So that was a big consideration for us as well. One of the things that we need to kind of vet out and discuss as we move this forward is, you know, it was brought up, okay, with this, if this restriction is approved the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, how do we keep non-resident vessels off of our public wetlands like Cheyenne Bottoms and Neosho on those off days? They're not supposed to be there to scout, disturb waterfowl, whatever. So that as we move forward, we're going to have to work out some of that language and where it's best suited within this process too. So again, we feel like this is a pretty good recommendation overall. Easy to enforce, easy to understand, easy to follow on an annual basis. It provides specific opportunities for resident hunters, which we felt strongly about, but also gives non-residents a chance to come in here and hunt and still allow Kansas business owners to hopefully not see too much of a negative economic impact. The last thing I'll say about this proposal that I wanted to mention is, as we move forward too, one thing we want to do in the future is through the statutory legislative process is change the waterfowl stamp language. There's some language within that, and it's a Chapter 32 statute that would have to be amended through the legislature. There's some outdated language with that. We would also like to propose a specified non-resident specific waterfowl stamp at a higher rate. So that would be the time to do that. My recommendation is there's several of our Chapter 32 statutes that are in dire need of amendment. They're outdated. We need to have some review of that. And so whenever the secretary feels is appropriate time to bring those to the legislature, I'd like to have a pretty extensive list to cover many of our statutes and not just one or two specifically that might get picked apart per se as we move forward. So with that, on this specific recommendation, I will stand for questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Can we have this done by September?
That's Mike. I appreciate your question. And the problem is, I'm going to be frank, no. Because of the new promulgation process, we've talked about this and I just don't see how it's realistic, and Terry might be able to offer some insight on that too.
It's a good idea and you'll get a lot of support for it, but I don't think there's any way legally we can get a regulation passed in time for September. I wish we could. I'm ready for it now, but I think this is a well thought out recommendation.
So what? 23-24 season?
Yeah, I think that's realistic.
24.
Yeah, sorry,
25.
24, 25. Yeah. Yeah. Mike, the thing is, if we tried to go the statute wise, do all this under the waterfowl stamp, it could take us 5-10 years. It just depends on the climate of the legislature. And so this is the quickest process.
I think that the commission and others need to reflect on this, but I think from a framework perspective, it's a good compromise.
And my hat's off to you because you've taken this, we've talked several times about this. But the only thing my concern is it really feeds to the outfitters. It really does. I mean, it just opens them wide up.
But I
Yeah.
don't know how we can fix that.
It's just,
Outfitters, you can't commercial hunt on public lands.
I know, but it's gonna move to more
Yeah. And so Mike,
private land where I can't access it because it's leased.
that was part of this whole process too. And that we talked about everything. And so, the guide and outfitter conversation we had earlier in today, as we were talking about both things at the same time. So hopefully if the guides and outfitters can reform or however that goes, whether it be regulatory, statutory, whatever the future holds, if the two can play hand in hand and there's more regulatory or over on that side of things, something like this might alleviate those issues too. So, and the way that we're looking at managing this, just for clarity too, up front is, I'll be asking here in a little bit under the reference document to go statewide with all of our properties for check-in and check-out. So that's how we would manage this type of restriction under an acknowledgement to where if a non-resident tries to is in Kansas, wants to hunt a public property on a Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, and they try to check in, they'll immediately get that acknowledgement saying you cannot check in. So that may change with as we move forward with Brant and the improvements we're making there. But for just transparency, that's what we've kind of thought and lined out would be the best path for managing it.
Do you see that check in, check out in western reservoirs happening for next hunting season? Can you see that?
This is all being proposed as the package statewide.
Brand, check in, check out, as far as getting e-check in the western reservoir.
So we've already discussed that part. We've workshopped it some already. We're just kind of bringing it back now with the other reference document things, and I'll have to talk to Dan and Terry, but we've already workshopped that stuff a lot. This new KAR is a separate matter that we're, and that goes back to the timing. The way I foresee it and understand it, I think we could implement the check-in and check-out for this fall or not, or is that going to go hand in hand?
It's ready to go through the promulgation process, but we felt that maybe adding some of the others to go through, because it's already going to take.
Right. So there's several other things that Ryan's proposed under the reference document already. And I'm going to talk about those here in a little bit. The statewide check-in and check-out was one of those. The new refuges at Cherokee Lowlands, boating restrictions, things like those. If we feel in the next meeting or two that those are ready to go to the promulgation process now, then those realistically could be implemented, the check-in and check-out for the 24 or for the upcoming hunting season, correct?
Do you think you'll be able to workshop this in June?
This new KR,
New regulation, yeah.
we're going to workshop at every meeting coming up until we feel like we're at a point where it's been vetted enough through public comment and commission input that we're ready to send it to the promulgation process. So it will be on the agenda.
26.
Yes,
So we're going to start workshopping it.
we're workshopping it right now because
Okay.
we've had the public lands regulations on the workshop portion of these meetings for several months.
Today is considered a workshop.
Yes.
Right. So
We have
this is
one more
number one.
workshop and then we can vote.
It's number 1 or 2.
Well, this specific regulation would be the first workshop for it. For public lands regulations in general, this is, I don't even know what number we're on now.
Eric, talk about timing. Well, timing, I mean, yes, yet we've made it a habit of in the past, prior to the legislative changes the last couple of years, that we'd have at least 2 workshops. That was typically how it worked. And then there would be a vote, publication and a voting of a proposed regulation. Now with the time delay, the problem becomes you can workshop it those traditional 2 times, but the promulgation process is what's really slowing everything down. It's once it's submitted, you guys seen it, everybody seems to be all right with it, but once it's submitted to the Department of Administration and the AG's office and the budget office, that's where it gets slowed down.
All I can say is do the best you can.
And I guess the point too, or the question comes back to, does it really matter if that's approved in time for the 23 season, the check-in, check-out part, when this new KAR likely won't be? The
I
two
just-
go
I
hand
just-
in hand.
I just think it's just crucial that we get this going.
Yeah.
Just
Two
Just-
years later,
3.
right?
Well, we're gonna move as fast as we can. Go ahead.
So the guys that are gonna try to beat the system by saying, well, I'm gonna go to federal, I'm gonna go to Beer or Flint Hills, you're gonna address this?
Thanks for bringing that up, Mike. I forgot to mention that. So we had the meeting with Bureau of Reclamation and Corps of Engineers coming up next week, May 2nd. We're having a meeting with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to try to implement the same thing and have uniformity statewide, regardless of whether you're on a department land and wetland owned, department owned wetland or a federal property, the same restriction applies. So that's what we're still trying to hash out. Right, and they know that, and we know that. And like I said at the beginning of this presentation, we don't want to just move the problem around from one property to the other. So.
You
Yes,
have to be a resident to register your boat here.
no. Don't
That's
think
an issue. Because our friends who bring their friends hunting here, if they register their boat here, it's gonna be a lot more difficult. For
in the
you guys
system to
track.
identify yeah, that's some, those little quirks we're gonna have to look at.
All right.
You,
Yes, sir.
I don't know if that's right or not.
I thought it was. I'll look into that.
Mark Roberts again. I pull my boat all over the place and operate in different states and never run into any problem at all. I don't think.
No, I'm not saying you can't go other places, but I'm saying somebody from Missouri, all they have to do is register their boat here, and it makes it more difficult for the landman. It seems to me.
To
it would
identify who's
make it
resident.
More difficult.
the-
Oh, that's a Kansas
The
registration.
risk
I don't
would
need to
be
check.
somebody brings their boat with KA numbers and sets it on the marsh. And we think it's a local.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're just, we would try to close that loophole. But I just don't know how you're necessarily gonna do that.
That's why I was just
Well, the-
asking.
the-
I don't know.
The restriction is the scouting of non-residents. That's what they're trying to eliminate is just the pure getting on the water and scouting. That's what we're correct.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, which is.
And that's easier said than done.
Right. I mean, it's with anything that we propose, there's always a level of enforcement challenge, and we try not to bring things forward that we don't realistically think can be enforced. But we're willing to put in the effort.
Well, do the best you can.
Chairman, I got a question first and then something I want to share with you. I want to make sure I understand this because I've got to share back with folks at home. This thing, the non-residents would be hunting on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the Kansas hunters, resident hunters would be hunting the other days of the week.
So they can hunt 7 days a week,
They can have
7 days a week,
Yeah, every.
not just the ones that
I'm glad I
through.
asked the
It's,
They get
it's
the whole,
not,
yeah.
it's not exclusive.
No, the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday are the times that we're proposing for non-residents to hunt public wetlands,
And then Kansas resident hunters can hunt.
7 days a week.
I've got to think.
Well,
about
no, hang on, Mike.
I gotta think about this a little bit.
It-
Before I, get too carried away here, but this is where we've been kind of hoping you guys would be leading to. Again, I've got to think about this for a little bit and see if there's any problems with it, but at first blush, it boy, is a big improvement. Now I want to go back to the special hunts thing. for just a moment. I know it's kind of mixing it up a little bit, but I do want to share something with you. An individual shared a statistic with me that he had pulled together within the past few days on non-resident versus resident on the special hunt situation. And currently, he's identified 85 special hunt permits that were given out to non-residents and only 4 to Kansas residents. Now, that's something that you can check in your own statistics, but from what I understand, it's supposed to be a good figure. A good figure, but it is interesting to note that that many non-residents got out. As far as the 150 some that you talked about, that's good news. I wasn't aware of it. It also sounds like to me that the resident hunters have given the opportunity to take advantage of it. And on the other hand, Commissioner Spore is bringing up a good point. We need to educate and encourage Kansas residents when they draw a special permit to utilize it.
Yes.
Now, I've had a few of them and, you know, if it's a bad day and I don't want to duck hunt or do something else, well, then, yeah, I'll give it away. But, you know, you can fight that kind of statistics if you survey at the end of the year and find out whether those people used those permits. You're surveying lots of other things that could be added into.
Included in one.
And that's all I have, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, it's a lot like if you live across the street from Disneyland. You can go any day you want, but you're not going to go when it's raining. But if you drove halfway across the United States to go to Disneyland, you're going to go.
Well, I appreciate those comments too. That's the one thing that we don't want to do is leave special hunts unfilled because, you know, and that's what we were hearing from staff as well. Their historical applicants were non-residents mostly, and they were filling them and they were coming and they were being successful. And so we left it at manager discretion during the pilot program, like Ryan was talking about, to let them decide whether they wanted to have it open to everybody or restricted to residents only based on their past historical application demographics. And so that number might fluctuate, might go up some more, might go down a little bit. We don't know. We were asked for annual reviews and input on that program every year. But yeah, again, I appreciate the comments. We just don't want to leave anything unfilled and unused. We, you know, if a resident has a special hunt and because it's too rainy or too chilly on that day, they don't show up when a non-resident could have been in the waiting and used it. We just want them to be utilized. So I appreciate the comments.